So this is something that we've talked about before, making the Brexiteers own that Brexit is their albatross. It's their burden to bear, not ours. And now that Johnson has his majority, we've talked about this again before. This is what will happen now. He has a majority, and with majority, all the failure is on Johnson and his government and the Conservatives. It's not on anyone else. They can't, blame it on Remainers, even though that's not the case. Their folly was the fact that they had no plan. They still have no plan. Johnson's withdrawal agreement does not fulfill the mandates that Leave said during the referendum. They very clearly campaigned for leaving the European Union politically, but remaining in the single market and customs union. But there you go. So we turn for the end of the week back to Ian Dunt, and his exact statement is one I've been saying: make them own it. Two good things came from the election result. You had to search for them in the great expanse of despair in which we found ourselves, but they were there. First, it forced Labour to change its leader. This is an unintentionally good. All of the candidates are better than Jeremy Corbyn, even Rebecca Long-Bailey, who has really very little to recommend her, and it would be a significant improvement. Secondly, it meant that the Brexiteers finally have to own their project. They have a massive majority. The withdrawal agreement bill soon through the common stages this week, and it leaves no more Leave versus Remainers, no more Parliament versus government. They're in control, and that means it's all on them. This great crushing reality of the trade talks will now take over. The warnings we've made over the past 3 years are about to be actualised. The government could have taken its significant new majority as an opportunity to tell the truth about what this would entail. But that would take a long time, and that would involve painful trade-offs. But even saying that out loud seems laughable. Of course, they continue with the relentless lies, because that is all, in the end, that allows this project to proceed. That's something else we've said. Brexit is built on lies, and lies cannot last. They will crumble sooner or later, and hey, that's what we're all about on this channel. Watching those lies being torn apart, and as usual, the Brexiteers in the comments throwing a hissy fit. I said it a couple of weeks ago. You're floundering because you're trying to convince people that you know what you're doing, when in reality you don't. And you have to now own this. Then say it can be done. They say it can be done all in a year. It cannot. Even if the trade talks themselves can be finished in a year, which is unlikely, the ratification and implementation will take longer. They say there will be no checks between Northern Ireland and Britain. There will be. It is not quite clear from the agreed text and the realities of trade, but to admit this would be to concede that instead of securing a brilliant deal, Boris Johnson, as Boris Johnson claimed, he actually just capitulated to a deal which even Theresa May thought was intolerable. That said, they want to close off EU access to our fishing waters. If they do this, the EU will reciprocate by putting up barriers to our ability to sell our fish into their market. It's not liberation. It's the last scene of Reservoir Dogs. They say they want no regulatory alignment with the EU. So if the relationship will be punishingly distant and bureaucratic for British exporters, modern trade functions on the basis of alignment, whoever you are trading with. The EU is simply much more sophisticated and much closer than other markets. They say they won't reduce food standards in the event of a deal with the US. They will. Or the deal would be without any substance whatsoever. This is the reality of what will happen, the real-world trade-offs, rather than the unicorn ecosystem of simple slogans and gibbering cynical nonsense. It couldn't take place at a worse time. Remainers are bruised. Years of campaigning only to be totally defeated. Years of trying to highlight the national interest and the reality of the threats that they face, only for the election to deliver a firm result of infinite simplification and outright deception. The temptation to look away, just to ignore it all for a while, to get lost in things that made us feel better, not to watch the news, but that hands them the control of the narrative just when it's most malleable. When those things start to go wrong and the trade-offs impede on the fairy tale, they will blame the EU. They will say they will say it is intransigent or unimaginative or arrogant. It'll be false. The failures will be a result of the strategizing on both the basis of myth rather than reality, of failing to accept the limitations of the world and the world working around them, of putting your military movements over a map of Narnia. The critical task is how to objectively report on the reality of what is happening, to deny them the opportunity to create another made-up story. There will be damage from these decisions. That's why Remainers have opposed them. The wealthy will be fine, they always are, but the poor will be hurt, and those will include those former Labour towns in the north who lent their vote to Johnson. We cannot stop that damage now. We tried and we failed. We urged the government to limit it by going back on its commitments, but there is little chance of them doing so. So instead, at least, a very bitter pill, very bitter, painful at least, we can point out why it's happening. We can tell the truth. This is the preconditional of a successful campaign to rejoin in 10 years or so, making sure that people see that the decline in their living standards is a result of Brexit. But it is also something else. It is also its own kind of rearguard moral defence, because when the Brexiteers' dreams turn to ash, they will blame everyone but themselves. They will blame the EU, they will blame the immigrants, and a period of declining prosperity will push the narrative of division against the weakest people in society. The best way to fight that is to make sure that they can't wriggle out of it now, to set the narrative in fact. We have to make them fully own it, and completely and without caveat. I agree, and that's exactly what we'll be continuing to do on this channel going forward. So don't think that we haven't finished talking about Brexit.